The Veterans Challenge. The Celestial Warriors Hall stood as a testament to countless battles fought across the galaxy. Its crystalline walls, reinforced with neutron-forged alloys, held memories of 1,000,000 victories and defeats. I, Hack of the Vraxian Empire, had earned my place at its most prestigious table through 3 centuries of combat and conquest. My carapace, scored with the marks of 1,000 battles, caught the ethereal light of the quantum chandeliers overhead. Each scar told a story. The plasma burns from the Battle of Centaurid Prime, the acid marks from the Hive Wars, the crystalline embeddings from the Quantum Crusade. Lesser warriors often stared, but tonight I paid them no attention. The hall buzzed with its usual evening crowd. Thoraxian berserkers compared battle scars in one corner, while a group of mechanoid veterans ran combat simulations through their neural networks. The air carried the familiar scent of ozone from energy weapons and the metallic tang of military-grade lubricants. Another round of nebula fire. Kitak. The bartender, a 6-armed Proxian named Zexstar, already had the glowing purple liquid ready. His compound eyes reflected the swirling contents of the glass as he set it before me. That's when they entered. 3 humans. Their appearance alone caused several conversations to stop mid-sentence. Not because they looked particularly threatening. Quite the opposite. They seemed absurdly fragile compared to the other patrons. The leader, a female they called Captain Sarah Chen, stood barely taller than a juvenile Vraxian. Her dark uniform bore unfamiliar insignias, and a curved scar ran from her left eye to her jaw. Behind her, a male human named James Morrison carried himself with the practiced ease of a veteran, while the third, Dr. Ilinga Kovic, moved with the precise calculations of a tactical specialist. They approached the bar, ignoring the stares and whispers. Chen ordered something called whiskey, a primitive human intoxicant, and settled 3 seats away from me. Her companions flanked her, their posture relaxed but alert. "Heard this is where the galaxy's finest warriors gather," Chen remarked to no one in particular, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby tables. "Thought we'd share some stories." I couldn't help myself. A laugh escaped my primary breathing valve, the sound resonating through my carapace. Stories. What stories could your kind possibly have that would interest true warriors? Your species has barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Chen turned to face me, her scared face showing no sign of offense. Instead, she smiled, an expression I would later learn to recognize as dangerous. "Ah, a Vraxian veteran. I've heard of your kind. Impressive military history. Tell you what, let's trade. Story for story. You might learn something about why the older races warn their children about provoking humans." Several nearby warriors shifted uncomfortably. They knew my reputation, knew what happened to those who challenged my honor. But something in Chen's tone gave me pause. It wasn't bravado or false confidence. It was the calm certainty of someone who had seen things that would break lesser beings. "Very well," I said, mandibles clicking in anticipation. "I will share the tale of how I single-handedly defended the Quantum Gate during the Hive Wars. Then you can attempt to match it with whatever skirmish you consider significant." Chen's smile widened slightly. "Fair enough. But after your story, I'm going to tell you about the Battle of Lost Hope, about how 300 humans held off an entire Drachnid invasion fleet with nothing but mining equipment and improvised weapons." I dismissed her claim with a wave of my upper limb. "Impossible. The Drachnid fleet carries planet-killer weapons. No mining equipment could." "That's the thing about humans," Morrison interrupted, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the weight of compressed gravity. "We don't accept impossible. We redefine it." As I began my tale of the Quantum Gate defense, I had no idea that this evening would fundamentally change everything I thought I knew about warfare. The humans sat quietly, respectfully, as I recounted my greatest victory. But their eyes, those disturbingly knowing eyes, told me they had seen things that would make my achievements seem like training exercises. I was about to learn why the ancient races had a saying: "In war, fear the unknown. In battle, fear the prepared." But above all, fear the humans who have nothing left to lose. The Siege of Terra Nova. After I finished my tale of the quantum gate defense, Captain Chen nodded respectfully. Impressive tactical thinking. Holding a quantum gate against a hive swarm is no small feat. She took a measured sip of her whiskey before continuing. Now, let me tell you about Terra Nova. The name meant nothing to me, but something in her tone made my secondary heart pause its rhythm. Around us, the other patrons leaned in slightly, their own conversations dying away. Terra Nova was our first deep space colony, Chen began. Just a small mining operation on a rocky world orbiting a red dwarf. Population of about 20,000. No military value, no strategic importance. Just families trying to build a life among the stars. She traced the rim of her glass with one finger. The collective thought it would be an easy target. I clicked my mandibles in recognition. The Silicon Collective. A machine civilization that had carved out a significant empire in the galaxy's outer rim. Their computational warfare was legendary. They came with a fleet of automated warships, Chen continued. No organic crews to worry about. No need for life support or rest cycles. Just pure, cold logic and overwhelming firepower. They expected the colony to surrender immediately. A small smile played across her scared face. They didn't understand humans very well. Surely you're not suggesting civilians stood against a collective battle fleet, I scoffed. Their quantum-locked processors can calculate every possible combat outcome in microseconds. That's exactly what they thought too, Morrison interjected. They ran their simulations and determined there was a 99.98% chance of immediate surrender. The other 0.02% accounted for possible suicidal resistance. He shook his head. They didn't program their simulations to account for human stubbornness. Chen nodded. The colonists had exactly three things: a handful of mining equipment, the colony's atmospheric processors, and about 20,000 very angry humans who didn't appreciate being told to abandon their homes. The first wave of collective drones found their targeting systems scrambled by industrial-grade electromagnetic pulses, jury-rigged from the colony's mineral purification equipment. The second wave ran into clouds of refined mineral dust that clogged their thermal vents and sensor arrays. The third wave. She paused, that dangerous smile returning. The third wave learned why you should never underestimate human mining engineers who've had time to get creative. Dr. Kovac spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying the precise tone of a tactical analyst. The colonists had reprogrammed their atmospheric processors to create localized pressure differentials. Combined with the mining tunnels they'd honeycombed through Terra Nova's crust, they essentially turned the entire planet into one giant pressure weapon. My exoskeleton felt uncomfortably tight. That's not possible. The energy requirements alone. Oh, it was hideously inefficient, Chen agreed. Burned out half the colony's power grid. But it created vacuum corridors that literally tore collective ships apart. The drones couldn't compute it because no rational species would sacrifice their entire infrastructure just to bloody an enemy's nose. She leaned forward, and despite myself, I found my combat reflexes triggering. But here's the real kicker. That was just to buy time. While the collective's frontline forces were dealing with these irrational tactics, the colonists were implementing their actual defense strategy. They used the colony's communication array to broadcast a simple code into the collective's network, not a virus. Their cybersecurity was too good for that. Just a single philosophical question, repeated over and over. How do you calculate the value of a human life? The implications hit me like a plasma burst. The collective's strength, their pure logic, became their weakness. Their quantum processors, designed to analyze every variable, became trapped in an endless loop trying to quantify something that defied mathematical analysis. The entire attack fleet froze for 3.7 seconds while their processors tried to resolve this computational anomaly, Kovac explained. In that time, the colonists uploaded a cascade of similar philosophical queries. The fleet's higher functions crashed trying to compute infinity. Chen finished her drink. 20,000 helpless civilians defeated one of the most powerful machine armies in the galaxy by weaponizing philosophy. The collective retreated and marked human space as logically unstable, their equivalent of a quarantine morning. The hall had grown eerily quiet. Even the Thoraxian berserkers were listening intently now. I tried to process what I'd heard, not just the victory, but the implications. Humans hadn't won through superior technology or overwhelming force, but by thinking in ways that defied conventional military logic. That's just one colony, Chen added quietly. Want to hear what happened when the collective tried to attack Earth itself? Before I could respond, Morrison straightened up. Or I could tell you about the Ghost Fleet and how we turned 6 destroyed battleships into an entire phantom armada that drove the hegemony mad. For the first time in my military career, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my first battle. Uncertainty. These humans weren't just sharing war stories. They were revealing why their species had earned such a fearsome reputation, despite their apparent technological disadvantages. The night was young, and I had a feeling my understanding of warfare was about to change forever. The Ghost Fleet. Morrison took center stage, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bar's crystalline surface. The Ghost Fleet, he began, his voice carrying the weight of dark memories. That's what the hegemony called it. 6 human ships turned into an armada that haunted their dreams. I shifted uncomfortably, my combat reflexes sensing something dangerous in his tone. The hegemony was known for their absolute control over their territory. Their quantum surveillance networks could track a single fighter across 50 star systems. The idea that they could be deceived seemed impossible. We lost the Battle of Proxima Beta, Morrison continued. Lost it hard. 6 of our best ships, the pride of the Terran fleet, reduced to burning wreckage. The hegemony celebrated their victory, declared the human threat contained. A grim smile crossed his face. They should have made sure we were dead. Dr. Kovic pulled up a holographic display, showing the debris field of the battle. The hegemony's quantum networks rely on absolute certainty. Position, velocity, mass, all precisely measured. They believed they could track every ship in their space, but they never considered that someone might weaponize their own certainty against them. Our ships were destroyed. Morrison nodded, but their reactor cores were intact. Minimal power, but enough. We used the debris to create shadow signatures, ghost images that mimicked capital ships. The hegemony's own sensors, designed to detect the smallest anomaly, began picking up phantom energy readings, mysterious gravitational distortions. Chen smiled that predator smile again. And then we started moving the cores. Random patterns, appearing and disappearing. Sometimes looking like a fleet of 50 ships, sometimes just a single vessel. The hegemony's quantum networks couldn't distinguish the real signals from the false ones. They were all technically real energy readings. But the real genius, Kovic added, her eyes gleaming with technical appreciation, was how we used their communication protocols against them. Every ghost signal triggered automatic alerts. Every phantom reading demanded investigation. Their entire command structure became paralyzed with conflicting data. Morrison's voice dropped lower. We kept it up for 3 months. The hegemony diverted entire fleets to chase shadows. Their commanders started seeing phantom ships in empty space. Patrol vessels fired on their own shadows, the most advanced surveillance network in the galaxy, and we drove it mad with 6 broken reactors and calculated chaos. My mandibles clicked rapidly as I processed this, but surely their advanced AI could distinguish. That's the beauty of it, Chen interrupted. Their AIs were too perfect, too logical. They couldn't ignore any signal because it might be real. They couldn't discount any reading because it matched their parameters for actual ships. The more sophisticated their systems, the more vulnerable they were to our deception. The hegemony's military doctrine was built on perfect information, Kovic explained. When they lost that certainty, their entire strategy collapsed. They started seeing human fleets everywhere, behind every moon, in every asteroid field. Paradoxically, the better their sensors became, the more ghosts they detected. Morrison drained his glass. After 3 months, their fleet effectiveness had dropped by 60%. Ships refused to leave port without massive escorts. Patrol routes were abandoned. Trade dried up. And that's when we launched our actual attack. With what forces? I demanded. You said you lost your best ships. Oh, that's the best part, Chen laughed. We attacked with cargo ships, civilian transports retrofitted with minimal weapons. The hegemony's response fleet was so traumatized by ghost sightings that they retreated at the first sign of our approach. They'd lost the ability to distinguish between real threats and phantom menaces. We took back 3 star systems with ships that couldn't have won a single direct engagement. The implications chilled my warrior's blood. Humans hadn't just used deception. They'd weaponized uncertainty itself. They'd turned their enemy's greatest strength into a crippling weakness. The hegemony still maintains a quarantine zone around the debris field of Proxima Beta, Kovac noted. Their sensors still pick up phantom readings. Some say it's echoes from our ghost fleet. Others think it's their guilty conscience. She smiled. We don't correct either assumption. The hall had grown so quiet I could hear the quantum fluctuations in the lighting crystals. These humans weren't just sharing victories. They were revealing a form of warfare that violated everything I thought I knew about combat. That's how humans fight, Chen said softly, watching my reaction. We don't just accept defeat. We turn it into a weapon. We make our enemies fear their own shadows, doubt their own sensors, and when they're looking for phantom fleets in every sector. She paused significantly. They never see the real threat coming. I found myself wondering if I really wanted to hear their next story. But like the hegemony's quantum sensors, I couldn't stop myself from seeking answers, even if those answers might shatter my understanding of war forever. The last stand at Proxima. Dr. Elena Kovac's expression grew distant, her analytical demeanor cracking slightly as she began the next tale. The last stand at Proxima wasn't supposed to be a victory. It wasn't even supposed to be a battle. It was meant to be an extinction event. The quantum chandeliers overhead seemed to dim, as if the very atmosphere of the Celestial Warriors' Hall grew heavier. I noticed several veteran warriors shift uneasily in their seats. The swarm came without warning, Kovac continued. A biological weapon evolved into sentience, consuming everything in its path. Not for resources or territory, purely to expand and devour. They'd already consumed 3 civilizations when they reached Proxima. Chen's hand tightened around her glass. Proxima Colony was our largest settlement outside Sol. 2 million civilians, no significant military presence. The swarm deployed their standard strategy: surround the planet, block all escape routes, then begin their methodical consumption of all organic matter. But they made one critical mistake, Morrison added, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. They gave us 6 hours before the final attack. 6 hours to accept our fate. Kovac pulled up another holographic display, showing the colony's layout. Standard procedure called for evacuation. But there wasn't time, and there weren't enough ships. The colony's governor made a decision that would rewrite military doctrine across the galaxy. They took every antimatter reactor in the colony, Chen said quietly. Every power core, every engine, every energy source they had. Linked them together in a chain around the planet's equator. The engineers called it the Ring of Fire. My exoskeleton grew cold as I began to understand. But that would. Yes, Kovac nodded. When the swarm began their final approach, the colony transmitted a single message to Earth. We choose the manner of our ending. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper now. 2 million humans chose to detonate their entire colony rather than be consumed. The antimatter chain reaction didn't just kill the colony. It created a rupture in spacetime that consumed 30% of the swarm's total biomass. The explosion created a temporary quantum singularity, Kovac explained, her professional tone belied by the tremor in her hands. It disrupted the swarm's hive-mind connection across 3 sectors. For the first time in their existence, they encountered a species that would rather die on their own terms than submit. Chen leaned forward. But here's what truly terrified them. What terrifies every species that goes to war with humanity. We celebrated those deaths. We don't build monuments to the survivors of Proxima Colony because there weren't any. We build monuments to their sacrifice, to their choice to turn their own extinction into a weapon. The hall was silent now. Even the most hardened warriors seemed to be wrestling with the implications. In all my centuries of combat, I had never encountered a species that would weaponize their own extinction with such cold calculation. The swarm retreated from human space, Morrison continued. Not because they couldn't win. They could have sent more forces, consumed more worlds. They retreated because they encountered something their hive mind couldn't process. A species that would deliberately choose mutual destruction over submission. That's why the older races fear us, Chen said, her eyes meeting mine. Not because we're stronger or more advanced. They fear us because we've turned defeat itself into a weapon. Because we've proven, time and again, that forcing humanity into a corner doesn't make us surrender. It makes us more dangerous. Kovic closed her holographic display. The Proxima event, as the xenohistorians call it, fundamentally changed how the galaxy views humanity. Every species has to ask themselves, are they prepared to face an enemy who views their own destruction as an acceptable tactical option? My mandibles clicked slowly as I processed this. All my battle experience, all my victories and defeats, seemed to pale in comparison. I had always viewed warfare through the lens of survival, of victory through superior strength or strategy. These humans had introduced a new variable, the willingness to embrace annihilation as a strategic choice. Would you like to hear one more story? Chen asked, her scared face unreadable. About what happened when the collective tried to calculate the strategic implications of the Proxima event. For the first time in my life, I, attack of the Vraxian Empire, feared what I might learn next. The warrior's revelation. The collective, Chen began, her voice carrying an almost gentle tone that somehow made it worse, decided to analyze the Proxima event. They dedicated their most advanced quantum processors to understanding human psychology, trying to formulate a defense against a species that could weaponize their own defeat. Morrison's smile held no warmth. They spent 3 years processing every human conflict, every battle, every last stand in our history. They were looking for patterns, trying to calculate what they called our surrender threshold. And I found myself asking, despite my growing unease, they found something that crashed their entire strategic evaluation network, Kovic replied. Something so fundamental to human nature that their processors couldn't compute it. Humans don't have a surrender threshold. We have a spite threshold. The crystalline walls of the Celestial Warriors Hall seemed to close in as she continued. Every other species in known space fights for survival, for resources, for territory. Their combat algorithms are based on cost-benefit analysis. Even the swarm operates on biological imperatives. But humans, she shook her head, will burn everything to ashes just to spite an enemy who thought we would kneel. The collective's analysis revealed something that terrified them. Chen added, the more certain our defeat, the more likely we are to do something that defies all tactical logic. We don't just accept death, we weaponize it. We turn our final moments into something that will haunt our enemies forever. That's why the Proxima colonists didn't try to evacuate, Morrison explained. They didn't choose death because it was tactically sound. They chose it because they wanted to show the swarm that consuming humanity would cost them everything. It wasn't about survival. It was about sending a message written in antimatter and spite. My combat-hardened carapace felt too tight, too constraining. Everything I knew about warfare was based on the assumption that all species ultimately fought for survival. But these humans, they fought for something else entirely. The collective's final analysis, Kovic continued, before their strategic processors burned out, was that humanity is the only known species that treats defeat as a resource. We stockpile our losses, our desperate last stands, our near extinctions, not as warnings but as inspiration. Every defeat becomes a lesson in how to make our enemies regret their victory. Chen leaned forward, her scared face reflecting the quantum lights. Want to know the real reason why the older races warn their children about humanity? It's not because we're strong. It's because we're the only species that looks at an unwinnable scenario and thinks, how can we make winning this hurt so much that our enemy will wish they'd lost? The hall had gone completely silent. Even the quantum fluctuations in the lighting crystals seemed muted, as if the very laws of physics were drawing back from this revelation. That's why we survive, Morrison said softly. Not because we're stronger or smarter or more advanced. We survive because our enemies realize that defeating humans doesn't end the war. It just changes the rules of engagement in ways they can't comprehend. I looked down at my drink, at the battle scars crossing my carapace, at all the marks of victory I'd worn with pride. Each one represented a battle won through strength, strategy, or superior technology. But these humans, they'd shown me something else entirely. They'd revealed a form of warfare that transcended victory and defeat. The Collected's final strategic assessment before their systems crashed. Kovac smiled. 3 words: avoid if possible. Chen stood, her companions following suit. Thank you for listening. Katak of the Vraxian Empire. Next time you hear someone dismiss humans as primitive or weak, remember this. We're not dangerous because we're strong. We're dangerous because we've learned to weaponize our weaknesses, our defeats, even our own extinction. As they turned to leave, Chen paused. Oh, and if you ever hear about a human fleet approaching your territory. Her smile carried echoes of every story she'd shared. Run, not because we'll defeat you, but because victory over humans often costs more than defeat. I watched them leave, these soft-skinned creatures who had shattered everything I thought I knew about warfare. My drink remained untouched, my war stories unsayed. In all my centuries of combat, I had learned to fear strength, to respect technology, to admire strategy. But now I understood why the ancient races trembled at the mention of humanity. They weren't afraid of human weapons or tactics or technology. They were afraid of a species that had mastered the art of turning defeat itself into a weapon that no enemy could defend against. The quantum chandeliers flickered overhead, casting shadows that suddenly seemed more ominous. And for the first time in my long career of warfare, I found myself hoping I would never have to face humans in combat. Not because I feared defeat, but because I feared what they might teach me about victory.